The sun was barely a smear of orange on the Pacific horizon when the carrier's alarm started screaming. Blue Squadron, scramble. Bogies inbound, range 20 miles. Engines coughed to life. Deckhands sprinted through smoke and salt spray. And from the middle of that chaos came one plane that already looked half dead. An F4U Corsair painted with the number 17. Its nose was blistered with bullet holes, its wings patched like a scarecrow. Inside, Ensign Jack Tully tightened his harness and whispered to no one, "Just hold together a few more minutes." The sound in the cockpit was pure violence. Oil hammering against the cowling, the gun sight flickering red through a spiderweb crack in the glass. He'd just done the impossible. 3 kills in 90 seconds. 3 enemy fighters gone, almost before his squadron could blink. Now, his oxygen mask hissed with his every breath. The radio spat fragments of panic. "I'm hit, going in," and then nothing. And through that static, Tully's own voice, calm and flat. Blue 17 returning, low fuel, minor hits. The deck crew stared as he came in. The bent-wing bird bounced once, twice, screeching down the runway, smoke curling from its landing gear. The first man to reach the cockpit just shook his head. "How the hell are you still in one piece?" Tully only smiled. He knew what they were all thinking. This farm kid, the same one they'd mocked for aiming upside down, had just done something nobody thought physics would allow. In the next hours, every pilot on the carrier would replay those gun camera reels again and again, wondering how a so-called idiot from Iowa had changed the math of air combat. But before that moment, before the miracle, there had been months of blood, smoke, and funerals. The F4U Corsair was the pride of Navy engineers and the curse of its pilots. They called it the bent-wing bird, 2,000 horsepower, the biggest propeller of any single-engine fighter. And torque so violent it could flip the aircraft upside down before a rookie even left the deck. On paper it was unbeatable. In practice it was killing its own men faster than the Japanese could. The doctrine was clear. Keep the nose level, line up clean, squeeze a steady burst. Anything else was reckless. Anything else and your commanding officer would chew you alive. But that rule, that obsession with perfect textbook flying, was slaughtering real people. In 1944 alone, the Pacific squadrons lost 1 in every 5 Corsair pilots. Some never made it off the carrier. Others died over open water, trapped under their own burning aircraft. Lieutenant Red Mallory, age 26, tried to hold the rulebook formation while a 0 cut across his nose. The torque flipped his Corsair like a coin. His last radio transmission was one long, rising scream. Petty Officer Cruz, known for his quiet grin, tried to fight the recoil in a climb. The engine stalled, then caught fire mid-turn. They found only oil slick and ash. The air still smelled of him 2 days later. Every man on the flight deck knew what the problem was. The Corsair's recoil and torque combined like a hammer. When you pulled the trigger, the plane twisted up and right, jerking the nose away from the target. It wasn't human error, it was physics. But command wouldn't listen. "Discipline fixes physics," one instructor barked. So good pilots died flying correctly, and bad ones just died faster. In the middle of it was Jack Tully, 22, farm kid from the Iowa plains. He grew up patching tractors and hunting pheasants, not calculating vector tables. He wasn't supposed to be there. He'd scraped through training on instinct, not skill. The kind of guy who could feel the wind but couldn't explain it. Instructors called him the tumbleweed. Others said he had a death wish. He didn't. He had something simpler, a sense that the rulebook was wrong. In the mess hall, where trays clattered and the smell of coffee mixed with burnt oil, Tully sat alone most nights. While others played cards, he drew little arcs on napkins, marking angles, recoil lines, wind directions. He'd noticed something strange during a gunnery dive. Every time he fired, the recoil kicked the plane up and right. But if he rolled the Corsair just slightly inverted, the kick cancelled itself out. The rounds flew straighter. It made no sense on paper, and it looked insane in the air, firing while the world was half upside down. When he told his flight lead, the man laughed until he coughed. "Kid, that's how you die." The next morning, his commanding officer called him in. "If I ever see you roll inverted in a gunnery pass again, I'll have your wings. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." Tully saluted and walked straight back to the hangar bay, still thinking, but what if it works? Because he didn't care about being right. He cared about coming home alive, about making sure the next Red Mallory didn't burn up trying to do everything by the book. After that, the tests began, quiet, secret, and utterly illegal. The carrier's log said, "Training flights 1 hour." In reality, Tully stayed out until dark. He'd climb to 10,000 feet, roll inverted, fire short bursts, then recover before the oil surged and starved the engine. Every time he came back, his hands were trembling from G-force and adrenaline. He'd pull off his gloves and find the fabric torn at the seams. The deck crew noticed his bird coming back hot, the nose paint scorched by tracer heat. They'd whisper as he taxied in, "That fool's gonna auger in any day now." Below decks, he measured every bullet hole on a chalk wall. Each dot marked a burst pattern. At first, his shots scattered. Then, gradually, they tightened into a single line, dead center. He called it chasing the recoil. It was brutal work. The Corsair's cockpit stank of sweat, hydraulic fluid, and cordite. When he rolled upside down, the blood rushed to his head so hard he saw stars. One wrong flick of the wrist, and the 14-foot propeller would bite air the wrong way and torque him into the sea. But he kept going, because the alternative was dying the right way. One evening, as the sky turned violet over the Pacific, a mechanic named Webster watched Tully climb out of his plane, shaking. "Trying to kill yourself, Ensign?" he said. Tully just grinned. "Trying to figure out why I'm still alive." Webster spat into the sea and muttered, "If you live long enough to prove it works, I'll buy you a beer." Tully didn't answer. He was already thinking about the next flight. He'd get that chance sooner than anyone expected. Okinawa, April 1945. The biggest air battle of the Pacific was boiling over the horizon. Radar screens blinked red with hundreds of blips. Kamikaze swarms, Zero fighters, bombers all mixed together. The sky looked like a living storm. Tully's squadron launched into a headwind that felt like hitting a wall. Radio chatter was pure chaos. 12 Zeros inbound, break, break. Tracer lines ripped the air. His wingman, Baker, took a burst across the fuselage. The cockpit went up like a flare. Tully saw the flash and felt the heat even through his canopy. Then he rolled. What came next would look on gun camera like madness. But in those 90 seconds, the madness made sense. At 3,000 feet over Okinawa, the sky was a whirlpool of fire and smoke. Tracer lines arced in every direction. Black bursts from ship flak rose beneath him like angry fountains. Tully's Corsair vibrated so hard it felt alive, the kind of shaking that made your teeth ache. He was alone now. His squadron scattered or gone. "Blue 17, where the hell are you?" crackled through the radio. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The channel was a blur of screams and static. Then he saw them. 3 Zeros dropping from the sun in perfect formation. Silver wings flashing, yellow nose tips glinting like knives. Every pilot knew what came next. Once they got behind you, you didn't last 5 seconds. Tully banked left, too slow. The lead Zero fired, bullets hammering into his right wing. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the canopy, burning his eyes. He rolled again, desperate. The plane wanted to talk out, that same curse every Corsair pilot feared. Then instinct took over. He flipped the bird upside down. For a split second, the world inverted. Ocean above, sky below. Gravity pressed his helmet against the canopy. His fingers tightened on the trigger. The recoil and torque, instead of fighting him, cancelled each other out. His tracers drew a perfect, burning line straight into the enemy's belly. The Zero exploded mid-dive, spinning away in a shower of wings and fire. Before the other two could react, Tully was already rolling out of it. Another inverted burst. The second Zero's wing snapped clean off. He felt the Corsair shudder, the guns overheating, the smell of cordite flooding the cockpit. The third enemy came screaming down from his right, guns blazing. Tully yanked the stick, rolled halfway, fired again. 3 planes, 90 seconds, then silence. Just the low growl of the engine and the sound of his own breathing. He looked around. The sky was empty. He'd survived what no one should have. Down below, on the carrier USS Bunker Hill, they saw the distant explosions and thought Blue 17 was gone. When his battered Corsair limped back into view, radioing calmly, returning to base, out of ammo, the deck crews stopped what they were doing. One man whispered, "That kid's either possessed or blessed." When Tully climbed down, he didn't strut or shout. He just leaned against the wing, staring at the holes in his plane. His hands were trembling too hard to light a cigarette. That night, the officers' briefing room was thick with smoke. Pilots leaned over a flickering projector as the gun camera film played back in grainy black and white. On screen, they saw the impossible. A Corsair rolling fully inverted during a dive. Bursts hitting dead center. 3 kills in one pass.
Did you ever shoot down any Japanese?
At first, laughter. That's gotta be luck. Suicide stunt. Then silence. Because the film didn't lie. The tracers didn't scatter. The aim didn't drift. It was clean. Surgical. The squadron leader, Commander Rains, exhaled through his teeth. "I don't know what the hell I'm looking at," he muttered, "but it works." No one said it out loud, but they all knew. Tully had just rewritten the rulebook. Word spread like wildfire across the carrier group. Nobody called it shooting upside down. They gave it a name that sounded less crazy, the Tully Twist. By the end of the week, 3 more pilots tried it on practice runs. By the next month, it was showing up in combat reports. No official orders, no memos, just quiet imitation. The results were undeniable. Corsair kill ratios jumped by nearly 40% in his wing alone. Pilots who used the move came home more often. Mechanics started noticing different burn marks on the wings, straight-line streaks instead of wild spray. Something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, the bent-wing bird wasn't fighting itself anymore. It was free. Meanwhile, the enemy was starting to notice too. Japanese pilots reported that American Hellbirds were now hitting from strange angles, rolling over in the middle of dives, spraying precision bursts before vanishing into cloud cover. One Down Zero pilot told his interrogators, "They shoot from upside down, like madmen." Another said, "They have no fear of gravity anymore." Fear. That was the new weapon. The same Corsairs once mocked as clumsy monsters were suddenly unpredictable predators, and it had started with one kid who refused to listen. But in war, credit is a slippery thing. When reports about improved accuracy reached command, the official memo didn't mention Ensign Tully. It cited increased pilot discipline and gunnery refinement. Nobody asked who first inverted the plane. Nobody wanted to explain how something so dangerous had slipped through training protocol. Tully kept flying. Mission after mission, he rolled, fired, and lived to land again. By July, he'd logged 26 combat sorties, more than double the average before loss. But the war was almost over, and the Navy was already thinking about jets. When his rotation orders came, he packed his gear without a word. No medals, no interviews, just a slip of paper. Ensign J. Tully, reassigned stateside. He left the flight deck at dusk, cigarette ember glowing in the wind, while the other pilots clapped half-heartedly. They all knew what he'd done. They also knew it would never be written down. After the war, Jack Tully went home to Des Moines, Iowa. He opened a small gas station, married a nurse named Claire, and raised 2 kids. He never talked about Okinawa. Sometimes a neighborhood boy would see the old Navy wings hanging on the garage wall and ask, "Did you ever shoot down a Japanese plane?" Tully would just smile. Maybe 1 or 2. He didn't know that his half-roll firing trick, that desperate experiment born of fear and sweat, would live on. In the early jet age, instructors quietly began teaching a compensated roll burst technique during gunnery training. No one knew where it came from. It just worked. In the manuals, it was written like gospel. Inverted correction may counteract recoil drift. No mention of the name Tully, but every time a young pilot lined up a shot and rolled a few degrees inverted to steady his aim, he was echoing a ghost over Okinawa. Today, there are no medals with his face on them, no documentaries, no plaques, just a few yellowing pages in the Bunker Hills flight log, one labeled Blue 17, 3 confirmed kills, April 16, 1945. Beside it, a smudged signature. He never became an ace. He never made captain. But for those 90 seconds in a sky that should have killed him, the world turned upside down. And that's exactly how he won. The next morning, after that mission, a crewman found Tully standing alone at the ship's railing. The sea was calm, reflecting the dawn like melted steel. He flicked his last cigarette into the water and whispered, "Sorry, Red. We figured it out too late." Then he walked away, leaving nothing behind but a faint smell of smoke and salt. He'd done it not for glory, not for revenge, but so no one else had to die like his friends did. And in that quiet truth lies the kind of heroism no medal can ever describe. The war ended that August, the decks filled with sailors waving flags, bands playing off-key marches, pilots shaking hands without knowing what to do next. Jack Tully just watched it all from the shadow of the hangar, a duffel bag over his shoulder, a few oil stains still on his uniform sleeves. Someone shouted, "You going home, Blue 17?" He nodded. Guess the world doesn't need crazy farmers anymore. They laughed, but not unkindly, the kind of laugh you give a man who scared death and somehow got away with it. He boarded a transport ship bound for San Francisco, never realizing that in the film cans below deck, the gun camera reels from his last mission, history had quietly shifted. Somewhere in that black and white footage, a rule broke, and something new was born. Back in Iowa, the fields looked almost too still. The air smelled like soil instead of gasoline, wind instead of burning cordite. He traded his cockpit for a pickup truck, his flight jacket for a set of greasy coveralls. The locals knew he'd flown fighters but didn't ask much. Every man in town had a story by then, and most of them didn't want to tell it. When he opened his gas station on Highway 6, the sign out front read simply, "Tully's Service." No mention of rank, no mention of the Navy. But every morning before sunrise, he'd step outside, look at the horizon, and tilt his head slightly, as if lining up a shot no one else could see. He never wrote a memoir, never attended reunions. The war had burned that need out of him. What he'd learned up there wasn't about courage or glory. It was about instinct, about knowing deep down when the manual was wrong and the gut was right. 20 years later, in a small Air Force training classroom in Arizona, a young instructor clicked through a slide deck for new jet pilots. On the board behind him, written in chalk, "Inverted correction technique, recoil compensation." The recruits took notes without thinking about it, just another lesson. The instructor smiled. "It might feel unnatural," he said, "but it stabilizes your burst." Somewhere far away in Iowa, Jack Tully was filling a customer's tank, the smell of diesel thick in the air. The pilot training the new generation would never know his name, and Tully would never know his idea had outlived him. That's how history often works. Quiet revolutions carried on the shoulders of men who never get credit. A few seconds of genius, buried under years of silence. He died in 1972, heart failure behind the counter of his own station. His wife said he'd just been standing there, wiping a windshield, when his hand froze in mid-air. The local paper wrote a short column. World War II veteran, business owner passes at 49. Nothing about the 3 kills, nothing about the trick. When they cleaned out his workbench, they found a small wooden box tucked under the shelf. Inside were a pair of rusted flight goggles, one bent propeller fragment, and a single bullet casing engraved with the words, "For Red, for Cruz, for anyone who deserved better." The mechanic who discovered it didn't know what it meant. He just placed it on the counter, next to a photo of a young man grinning in a flight helmet, and said quietly, "Guess the boss used to fly." Years later, when a historian combed through declassified Navy training manuals, he noticed something odd, a reference to a half-roll recoil correction appearing suddenly in mid-1945, sourced only as field adaptation, unverified. No one could trace who invented it. The researcher wrote a note in the margin. Possibly from Pacific Carriers, 1945, uncredited innovation. He had no idea he'd just brushed past the ghost of Blue 17. If you stand on a carrier deck today, the air still smells faintly the same. Jet fuel instead of avgas, metal baked in salt wind, the same nervous laughter before launch. And if you listen closely, amid the clanging of chains and the rising engines, you can almost hear it, that old radio hiss, that breath before the trigger, that upside-down silence when gravity disappears. Every pilot who rolls into a dive and trusts his instinct over the manual owes something to a nameless kid who once doodled on napkins while everyone else played cards. He didn't chase medals. He chased a way home. It's easy to forget how fragile the war really was, how many victories balanced on a single moment of human stubbornness. A wrong turn, a half-second of doubt, and history might have gone the other way. Jack Tully's 90 seconds weren't about skill or luck. They were about refusing to die the right way. He turned the world upside down because nobody else would, and in doing so, he gave others a chance to live right side up. There's no grave marker with the word hero. No Hollywood film, no congressional record. Just a name in the crew list of the USS Bunker Hill, line number 73. Ensign John R. Tully, Air Group 84. The next time you see black and white footage of Corsairs banking through clouds, think of the one that rolled the wrong way, on purpose. Think of the laughter that followed him into the sky. And remember how quickly that laughter turned to silence. Because somewhere between fear and instinct, between the rule book and the impossible, that's where real courage hides. It doesn't always look like a medal. Sometimes it looks like a mechanic's kid flying upside down in a broken plane, trying to keep one more name off the chalkboard. The ocean never remembers the men who fell into it, but we can. We can remember the ones who dared to fly against it, even for a few seconds. For 90 seconds over Okinawa, a 22-year-old nobody from Iowa changed everything, and no one ever told the story. Until now. He never made ace, he never made captain, but for 90 seconds, the world turned upside down, and that's exactly how he won. If this story hit you the way it hit us, tap like so more people hear it. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Our audience runs from small-town mechanics to history teachers. And make sure you're subscribed, so these names don't disappear.